Hi, my name is Claire Mellema. I currently play oboe for wind ensemble at University of North Dakota, and I have played in the past with NVYO as a mentor for the oboe section. So I'm going to start by playing a scale with good tone quality. A pretty simple one to start with would be D major. D major is a relatively simple key, so it has two sharps, but it's a little tricky on the oboe because it involves going from B to C sharp, which can have some blips in it because you're going from one finger to 7 keys down. Other ways to practice D major to help with clarity and confidence of fingerings is to do it in thirds, which I'll demonstrate. Another way to help build up your speed on the scales is to practice them in different rhythms. For example, you could practice them in a dotted eighth, 16th fashion, like so. And then you can do the opposite. If you can think of other fun creative rhythms to practice your scales with, that is something that can really help work on your speed and also make it a little less monotonous. The relative minor to D is B, and this one should be done in 2 octaves if you can, because while B is a little lower, high B isn't an incredibly difficult note and is something that you're going to have to play regularly. So again, paying attention to the connection between B and C sharp. If you listen closely, you can tell I had a slight blip in mine. And you can do the same sort of exercises that I went over for the D major scale to help work on speed and clarity and connections for the minor scales. The next thing I'm going to demonstrate are the excerpts that are outlined for you in the audition form. Let's start with the mixed meter. So if you're not familiar with playing mixed meter, in this piece you want the 8th note to be constant. And you'll see how this plays out when I demonstrate the excerpt. The low register, the same thing applies. You want to make sure you drop your jaw. It's good to make a note of that in the music because it's easy to forget. As well as remember to provide that support at the beginning of the excerpt for the higher notes, so to make sure that they're in tune. When you're going from F to D, you should use forked F most of the time, and sometimes you can use left F, depending on what kind of oboe you have. Some oboes don't have this key, and if yours is one of those, don't worry about it. Forked F will be fine for this excerpt. So you want to use forked F going to D, as well as left E flat going to C, so that uses this little pinky finger. So you have left E flat to C, as opposed to the regular one, which uses your right pinky finger. And the articulation in this excerpt is also really important, so make sure you're paying attention. When tonguing an accent on the oboe, I usually think of tonguing with like a da syllable, and then a lighter t, ta for staccatos. With fast passages like this, you can use the same techniques that I mentioned for scales by playing alternate rhythms to help your finger dexterity and push up the tempo. So an example of that with this particular excerpt would be starting at the 4/4 measure after F. You could do a like dotted quarter or dotted eighth, 16th rhythm, and then switch it just like we did for scales. Breathing might also be a little bit of a struggle in this passage, since there aren't any obvious spots. If you need to take a breath, I would put it probably between the two G's in the 6/8 measure after F. That's about in the middle, and they're staccato, so you can sneak a quick breath and they're at the ends and beginnings of phrases. The second one is a little excerpt from Dance in the Cane Breaks. Quarter note is 66. When practicing, it's always a good idea to keep a metronome handy, whether it's on your phone or a physical one. And also when you're practicing, it's a good idea to play it along with the metronome, even though right now I'm going to play it without. So in that excerpt, it involves going from B to C sharp, kind of like in the D major scale that we went over. That connection can be a little tricky, so make sure you're aware of that connection because it involves so much hand movement. Another tip for that excerpt is to make sure that your mouth is a little more relaxed because it's a little bit lower. Going from A to E in the 3rd and 4th measures is going to be a little trickier because it's a low connection. Now it is tongued, but you still want it to be smooth. Also make sure to recognize the rests. So even though they're really short rests, because they're only 16th rests, they're still important. But at the same time, it's okay to maybe lift off the note before the rest a little bit sooner. The third excerpt is similar in that it's from Dance in the Cane Breaks, and it's the same tempo. But this one involves a little more embouchure movement because it starts out high, and you want to make sure that it's high and in tune, so while you're practicing, make sure you're using a tuner as well. And then it goes low. So while you may have to have a little bit firmer embouchure at the beginning of the excerpt, you're going to have to drop your jaw towards the end to make sure that the low C speaks. And another tip about decrescendos is that you don't want to put less air into the instrument in order to make it quieter, but rather keep blowing and with just as much force, and rather maybe tighten your embouchure a little bit. And don't be afraid to be loud. It says forte, and the oboe is a naturally quieter instrument, so it's much easier to make more dynamic contrast. If you start louder, you can get softer. Some general playing tips would be with your embouchure, make sure it is more open inside your mouth, almost like you're yawning, and that your lips are more in a whistling shape as opposed to biting down. So make sure it's and closed instead of. You don't want to bite down on the reed. You want to be able to let it vibrate in your mouth, and also having that open yawn quality inside of your mouth will help develop a better tone. And then as for holding the oboe, make sure it's not held between your knees. You should have your elbows out, and from the side you can see the oboe is almost an extension of my nose and mouth, as opposed to other instruments should be more tilted down in the knees. Whereas the oboe, want to make sure you're holding it above your knees and out, with your elbows away from your side. Well, that's all I have for you, and I hope you find this helpful when you're practicing and creating your audition.